Have you ever had a dream where, when you woke up, you felt like someone else had woken up with you? Not everyone remembers their dreams, but the terrifying part isn't what you forget. It's what you never dreamed at all. That still leaves a scratch on your skin the next morning. 3:13 a.m. That's the time when every single clock in the town of Bellmare stops. Every night. Every time someone falls asleep without locking their door. Every time one of them disappears, and no one ever says their name again. Not because they're afraid, but because they know exactly what happens if you dare speak her name while you're still asleep. Some houses were never meant to be built, not because of the way they were designed, not because of the land underneath, but because of the memories buried beneath their foundation, the ones hastily hidden in the basement, but never silenced. They call it Mercy Hill, but no one remembers who Mercy was. All they know is, when you fall asleep on that old bed, you don't dream your own dreams anymore. Welcome back to the Whisper Horror Channel, where horror stories don't stop at the screen, and ancient names still whisper through lullabies you thought you had forgotten. Tonight, we travel to a quiet town, where children still recognize the shape of a woman who was burned alive 300 years ago. A girl, descended from the bloodline of the one who sentenced her, returns to this place, not to rewrite history, but to return a stolen breath. Turn off the lights, lock your doors, and remember, if your mirror just blinked, you might have already slept too deep. Evelyn Graymont Holloway, a senior student at Boston University. She majored in cultural anthropology. In the world of young academia, she was known as a serious name, soft-spoken, always distancing herself from anything driven by emotion. She was raised in a family with a long tradition in law. Generations of judges and public officials throughout New England. From an early age, Evelyn was taught to see history, not as something to feel, but as something to analyze. But maybe it was that coldness that made her long for the things she couldn't explain. That day, Evelyn left the city, not to research a modern social structure, but to travel to Bellmare, a small town buried deep in the Vermont woods. There, scattered in old records, was a vague note about a witch burning, dated 1693. Evelyn chose that town for her final thesis. The title? The Influence of Myth and Oral Tradition on the Formation of Communal Memory in Post-Colonial New England. The Greyhound bus left Boston's Central Station nearly an hour late. The sky hung low. Light rain fell like soot mixed with mist. It clung to the windows in pale grey smears. She never liked autumn in the Northeast. It always carried the echo of winters that had died centuries ago. The driver didn't say a word the entire trip. He wore headphones. And every time the bus curved through a shadowed turn, Evelyn saw the dashboard lights reflect onto his face. His eyes were hollow, still, like wax. At exactly 4:21 p.m., the bus turned onto a dirt path, the road into the Vermont woods. Evelyn felt her phone vibrate lightly in her pocket, but when she pulled it out, there was only one message on the screen. No service, no network, no GPS, no one to call for directions. She looked out the window. Between the tall, straight pine trees stood a black bird. Not a crow, not a hawk. It was bigger. Its feathers were shiny. It stood tall, like a guard. And it didn't fly away when the bus came close. Its eyes stared straight at her. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Evelyn turned her face away as the bus rolled past. Her heart skipped a beat. Not out of fear, but because it felt like that bird had seen her before. In a dream. There's no central bus station in Bellmare. Only a crooked wooden stop. With a rotting porch roof. When Evelyn stepped off the bus, her leather shoes sank into a cold puddle of dirty water. The chill soaked through her socks instantly. No one came to pick her up. No taxis waited in line. Just one old sedan humming quietly in the distance. Its headlights cutting through the fog like dull, milky eyes. The driver was the only one willing to take Evelyn to the rental house up on Mercy Hill. But only under one condition. He would stop at the dirt path, not the house itself. "I don't drive onto that land," he said. His voice was rough, soaked in cigarettes. "That place. It doesn't belong to the sleeping anymore." Evelyn didn't respond. She opened her wallet, paid him in cash. He didn't take the change. As he drove away, he stared at her through the rear view mirror, long. As if trying to memorize her face. Or maybe, trying to decide whether she was still human. She walked nearly 2 kilometers down a forest path littered with dry pine needles. There was no wind. But the leaves still spun slowly in the air, as if moved by something unseen. Along the path, she came across a broken rocking chair, its legs splintered, covered in moss, as if it had been there since the Civil War. Evelyn stopped, looked around. No houses, no sounds. But the chair, it rocked, just once, then went completely still. When she reached the house, it rose quietly from the fog like a forgotten memory. 2 stories. Old colonial style. The roof sagged. The wood faded to a lifeless grey. The front door was slightly ajar, as if someone had just stepped in, or never left. The moment she stepped onto the porch, the temperature dropped, suddenly, like walking through liquid fog. Evelyn felt her skin tighten. She checked her watch. And then, condensation formed on the inside of the glass. Not from sweat, not from the cold outside, but from something cold inside the watch itself. She didn't understand it, but her body knew one thing for certain. This house wasn't opening to let her in. It was opening to swallow her whole. Inside, the house smelled old. Not moldy, not damp, but like ash and burnt paper. Evelyn flipped on the kitchen light. The fluorescent bulb flickered twice, then held steady. On the kitchen wall, a message, scrawled in charcoal, "Sleep deep and she will breathe through you." No name, no date, no signature, but the dust from the charcoal was still fresh. Like someone had written it just yesterday. Evelyn took one step back. The door behind her, which had already been open, closed with a soft click. There was no wind, no vibration, but the door knew the exact moment she had entered. She stood still, in the middle of the kitchen, her hand gripping the strap of her bag tightly. Not because she was afraid, but because something primal had awakened inside her. Evelyn Graymont, who studied history, who understood social structures, who knew ancient legal systems, was now just a creature, trembling in a place that had no logic. And this was only the first sunset, at Mercy Hill. Evelyn walked slowly through each room. Every wooden door creaked softly as she pushed it open, as if each one was waking something that had been asleep for a very long time. The first floor had a living room, a kitchen, and a narrow hallway, leading to a basement door. The door was sealed, with a rusty iron padlock. She didn't try to open it, just bent down, and peeked through the narrow gap beneath. Cold air crept upward. It smelled burnt. The bedroom was on the 2nd floor. The stairs groaned beneath her weight, but held. As she climbed, Evelyn noticed scratch marks, long and jagged, running along the wooden banister. like someone had once clung to it with their fingernails. Not to keep balance, but because they were being dragged. At the end of the hallway was the room she would stay in for the next several weeks. The window overlooked a line of pine trees. The sky outside was painted orange and ash gray. The curtains were rolled, but still intact. When Evelyn pulled them gently, they swayed slightly, even though the window was tightly shut. On the desk sat a small blackened brass mirror. Its surface wasn't dusty, as if someone had just used it. She placed her bag down, checked the outlets, opened her laptop. No signal, no connection to the outside world. That had ended the moment she crossed into Bellmare. She exhaled slowly. Still, nothing too frightening yet. Not yet. But something was watching her. From below the floorboards. From behind the mirror. From the crack in the wooden planks. Not because Evelyn could feel it, but because her body was already reacting. As if it had once tried to escape this place. Long ago. Evelyn sat down on the bed. The mattress let out a low groan. Not the usual kind of creak from old springs, but something deeper. Like a new object, disturbing an old space. Someone had clearly replaced the mattress recently, but nothing else had been touched. The curtains were still faded. The floorboards still worn. Only the bed was new. As if someone just wanted people to lie down comfortably and sleep deeply. Evelyn opened her notebook, jotted down a few observations. But her eyes kept flicking back to the mirror. Something was wrong with it. Not the reflection itself, not a distortion from bad glass, but something about the angle. The perspective inside the mirror didn't quite match the real room. In the mirror, the door behind her was slightly open. But when she turned to look, it was closed. She tested it, opening and closing the door, turning quickly, trying to catch something in the act. Each time, everything looked normal again, except one thing. Her heart pounded faster, each time she tried. She turned the mirror face down on the desk, closed the curtains. Night had already fallen. A dim yellow bulb burned quietly in the corner, like a single open eye. She checked her watch. 7:39 p.m. Still early. But her body already felt like it was suffering jet lag from some kind of spiritual time zone. She changed into her nightshirt, set a voice recorder beside the bed. It was a habit, left over from a project on sleep talking and subconscious speech. She once said that your own voice in the middle of the night is the most honest way to trace the unconscious. She didn't know that tonight, the first voice on that tape would not be hers. Outside, the wind had picked up, but the pine trees stood perfectly still. The first morning in Bellmare began in total silence. No birds, no cars, not even the wind. Evelyn woke up at 7:04 a.m. According to her mechanical wristwatch, her phone still had no signal. She sat up. The mattress beneath her was ice cold, like it had just come out of a freezer, even though she'd slept under thick blankets. The voice recorder was still running. She pressed stop. Didn't listen yet. The pressure in her temples was still heavy from the night. In the bathroom, Evelyn washed her face and caught her reflection in the mirror. For just a moment, her reflection blinked. Before she did, she froze, hands gripping the edges of the sink. She couldn't tell if it was exhaustion, or maybe light bouncing strangely from the window behind her. But she was sure of one thing. Her reflection had moved ahead of her. Evelyn put on her coat and stepped down to Bellmare's main street. The town had a gas station, a tiny grocery store, a closed coffee shop, and a second-hand bookstore. tucked inside a two-story house covered in dried vines. No one greeted her. People avoided eye contact. A little boy stood in front of a bakery. As Evelyn walked by, she heard him whisper to his mother, "Mum, that lady looks just like her." Evelyn stopped, but the woman grabbed the boy's hand and pulled him away. She didn't look back. Evelyn kept walking. The feeling lingered, like she had just been given a name by someone who didn't know hers. She didn't understand who her was until she turned a corner, past a small plaza behind the public library, and saw it. A cast iron statue, nearly 10 feet tall, standing in cracked cement. A woman tied to a wooden post, hair falling over her face, body leaning toward carved flames. Her face had been worn down, or deliberately chiseled smooth, but her eyes were still open. Not out of life, but out of guilt, the kind that others forced her to carry. At the base of the statue was a bronze plaque. In memory of the cleansing, 1693. Let this monument remind us of our vigilance against witchcraft, heresy, and temptation. May the fire purify what words could not. No name, no identity, just a warning, wrapped in righteousness. Evelyn read that final line over and over. For the first time in her life, she began to feel like folk tales, the ones she used to call academic garbage, might hold more truth than history itself. The bookstore was open. As she stepped inside, every single pendulum clock inside the shop stopped at exactly 3:13 p.m. No one touched them. No one else was in the store, except for the owner. An elderly woman, small-framed, grey hair, eyes clouded behind thick glasses. She didn't speak. She just stared at Evelyn for a long moment. Then, without a word, she reached into the drawer beneath the counter, pulled out a crumpled, aged piece of paper, and slipped it into Evelyn's coat pocket. Evelyn hesitated, then opened it. It was a worn-out copy of a letter. No name, no address. The ink had faded, but the message remained. "We silenced her, but her name still breathes." Evelyn looked up, but the old woman had already turned her back. She walked into the rear of the shop, without another word. No one said anything else. Evelyn stepped out of the bookstore, her fingers gripping the paper tightly. By noon, Evelyn returned to the house on the hill. Mrs. Grady, the landlady, was standing on the back porch. She held a bundle of dry firewood in her arms. Her face looked like it had been cut from burnt paper, wrinkled, ash-gray, uneven. She stared at Evelyn for a long moment, then said, "You shouldn't go into the kitchen after 2 in the morning. It's not because the fire hasn't gone out. It's because you wouldn't survive. What still burns there?" Evelyn gave a small nod, didn't respond. But from that moment on, she began to pay closer attention to the kitchen. The charcoal stain on the wall was still there. No one had cleaned it. And every time she stepped into the room after dark, she noticed the temperature felt strangely warm. Not cozy, but active, like someone was still cooking something not meant for the living. That night, in the bathroom mirror, Evelyn tried lifting her right hand. Her reflection copied the motion perfectly. But when she lowered her arm, the reflection stayed frozen, hand still raised, for a full beat, before slowly lowering it too. She didn't scream, didn't speak, just turned the mirror face down, and walked out silently. Back in her bedroom, she turned on the voice recorder from the night before. 7 hours of sleep sounds, breathing, shifting, until the final moments. At exactly 3:13 a.m. A hissing sound, like someone whispering through a scorched throat. Then silence. Evelyn didn't play it again. She turned off the recorder, pulled out the batteries, and placed them on the table. But the sound still echoed in her skull, as if it wasn't recorded at all, as if it had always been waiting inside her blood. She didn't sleep that night. Evelyn sat by the window, writing down what she had observed. She didn't try to explain anything, she just recorded it. She believed in documenting before interpreting, like any trained field anthropologist would. But the longer she wrote, the more her handwriting trembled. The ink began to bleed slightly, right at the final line, as she tried to describe the hiss from the recorder. Around midnight, she heard footsteps coming from downstairs. Slow, dry, like old shoes scraping against wood. Evelyn didn't move. The recorder still had no batteries. There was no one else in the house except her, and Mrs. Grady had already left earlier, saying she wouldn't return until morning. The footsteps stopped right at the base of the staircase. Then silence. Evelyn grabbed a flashlight, opened the bedroom door just a crack, and shined it down the hallway. Nothing. The stairs were empty, but there was a smell, something faint, like burnt hair. She slowly closed the door again. Then, from the kitchen, a soft metallic sound, like a spoon falling onto a stone floor. She didn't go downstairs. She locked the bedroom door, slipped the key under her pillow, and turned off the light. 3:13 a.m. She woke up, not because of noise, not because of light, but because of cold. She opened her eyes. The room was dark. No wind. The curtains didn't move. No sound at all. But she could feel it. Something. Someone. Standing at the foot of the bed. She didn't move. Not out of fear, but because her body refused to obey. Sleep paralysis spread down her spine. Her eyes were open, but nothing was clear. Then, a hand, cold, placed gently on her chest. A voice, right next to her ear. Now you feel it. The price of writing. What was meant to burn. She fought to move. One trembling finger, a twitch in her leg. Then she gasped, like breaking through heavy water. The flashlight on the desk was already on. Its beam pointed directly at the mirror. The mirror didn't reflect the room. It reflected the kitchen. Evelyn jolted awake. Not from a noise. Not from a nightmare. Not even from the sunlight cutting through the curtains. What woke her was a strange sensation. Something unfamiliar, coming from inside her own body. She couldn't tell where it began. Her chest? Her shoulder? Her spine? It didn't hurt, but it was there, like a scratch, on her sense of reality. The room was soaked in darkness, not the kind that fades with time, but the kind that feels heavy. Evelyn sat up. The blanket felt lighter, as if someone had pulled it down while she slept. The air wasn't cold, but her skin was damp with cold sweat. She took a deep breath. A faint smell hit her nose. Charred wood, mixed with something organic. Hair, skin, or fear, steamed from the night. She peeled the blanket away, and froze. Right in the center of the white bedsheet, a crescent-shaped tear, not clean, jagged, like it had been ripped by hand. Beneath it, her nightshirt, wrinkled, damp. She slowly unbuttoned the top. 1, 2. There, etched into her skin, a handprint, pressed into her sternum. Faint, 5 fingers, all drawn together, as if caressing. But the pressure felt like a warning. She didn't scream, didn't panic. Her eyes were wide, but dry. The cold from that print spread across her chest. Not sharp, but numb. Not hot, but deep. She touched the mark gently. And right then, a faint hiss echoed inside her ears. Like fingernails, scraping the inside of her skull. The sound didn't come from outside. It came from within. From the very center of that handprint. She jumped up, switched on the lamp. The room burst into yellow. Old wallpaper, old rug, silent curtains. Everything looked the same, except her. She turned to the mirror. No one behind her. But the mirror remained foggy, even though she wasn't breathing on it. She wiped it once. The fog returned. The third time, she pressed her palm against the glass. And a cold smudge appeared on the other side, matching hers, but arriving first. The air smelled like something had burned, and been wiped away too thoroughly. No smoke, no ash, but the room still clung to the feeling of something that had once burned here. She checked the floor near the bed, and spotted something wedged by the mattress. A silver spoon, old, bent at the tip, its surface blackened, as if scorched by flame. She didn't know where it came from, but she was certain it hadn't been there the night before. She picked it up. It was freezing. When she brought it close to her wrist, her skin prickled, like the metal remembered her. She slipped it into her coat pocket, not out of fear, but because she couldn't let it spend another night unwatched. The desk lamp was still on. She looked toward the bookshelf. Several hardback books had been shelved, out of order. She reached to fix them. And there, in the very back, her fingers brushed against something soft and heavy. She pulled it out. A leather-bound notebook, its edges scorched, the surface still smooth, as if oiled regularly. There was no title on the cover. She opened to the first page. And there, in bold handwriting, still dark with ink, still slightly bleeding into the paper fibers. The judge. We meet again. The pen pressure was firm. The angle. Familiar. Too familiar. It looked just like her own handwriting, but she had no memory of ever writing it. She flipped to the next page. Blank. Next. Blank. But the texture of the paper wasn't normal. It was thick, fibrous. It felt like dried skin. Some of the later pages were wrinkled, like they'd been touched by damp fingers or sweat. Evelyn pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. She tried to recreate the sentence, but her pen wouldn't write. She tried another. Still no ink. A pencil. The graphite scratched, but left no marks. She opened her laptop, launched Notepad, typed a line. Only blank spaces appeared. No letters. No cursor. No response. She turned back to the notebook, and there, beneath the first sentence, a second line had appeared. Don't rewrite it. Only one memory is allowed to live. Her hand gripped the notebook tighter. No one else was in the room. But each line in that book was digging into memories she didn't know she had. The window pane had fogged up, but this time, the condensation had formed on the inside. Evelyn stepped closer. There, she saw it. A small circle, then another, and another. As if someone was standing just behind the glass, breathing, slowly, deliberately. Evelyn didn't wipe it away. She didn't want to know if the marks would vanish. Because if they did, it would mean someone was still there, watching, waiting. She turned back to the desk, placed the notebook down, then leaned back in the chair. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded. But what unsettled her most wasn't fear. It was familiarity. Everything happening now felt like it had happened before. Not in a dream, not in a story, but in a life that had already ended in fire. Evelyn didn't sleep again. She sat frozen at the desk. Her hand rested on the table's edge, still, as if all decisions had been drained from her fingers. The desk lamp flickered once, then steadied. The house seemed to accept her silence as a kind of surrender. Outside, the wind through the pine trees picked up, but something about it was off. It didn't sound like wind in the branches. It sounded like footsteps. Pacing, deliberate, as if someone was walking slowly, in perfect circles, around the house. Not running, not sneaking, just stepping, step by step, on the dry earth. Again, and again. Evelyn didn't want to believe someone was out there, but something about the way the sound bounced through the wooden walls made her skin tighten. The house wasn't insulated. It was echoing, carrying the sound of something circling her. Almost without realizing it, Evelyn stood, stepped toward the bedroom door. She placed her ear against the wood. 3 seconds later, a sound came from below. Scrape, click, drag, like something being pulled across the kitchen floor. Not a mouse, not a tree brushing the glass. Something wet, heavy, dragging across stone. She didn't open the door, but she didn't step back either. And in that moment, Evelyn realized she was no longer Evelyn Graymont. Not the anthropology student, not the woman who believed in reason and cause and effect. She was now part of the house, part of the sound. A breath, trapped between two worlds. She returned to the desk. The notebook was already open, even though she clearly remembered closing it. On the page, a new line had appeared. Don't wait for morning, you've already started. She closed the notebook tightly, but her fingertips, still damp with cold sweat, left a print on the leather cover. A faint smear, in the shape of a number. 3. 3 what? 3 nights? 3 people? 3 souls? 3 last chances? She had no answer. But outside, the sound of footsteps had stopped. They were no longer circling the house. They were standing right in front of the main door. Evelyn no longer knew how long she had been sitting there. Time passed, only measured by the numbness in her wrist, and the cold spreading into her fingertips. But inside her, something else had started to shift. A quiet war between what she knew, and what she could no longer deny. Her brain still catalogued each event. Footsteps, voices, the notebook. But her mind kept trying to reject it all. She had studied collective delusion, mass psychosis, how an entire community could believe in hallucinations, triggered by a shared subconscious. Now she was that community, just one person, carrying 1,000 reactions inside herself. She stood, walked slowly to the mirror. That small, blackened brass mirror, still hanging by the bed, still untouched by dust. Evelyn had avoided it since her first night, but now, it felt like the only thing left that could confirm she was real, or not. She looked straight into it. It showed the room, the window, the chair, the notebook. But her reflection didn't appear immediately. It came slowly, like a photo being developed. And when it fully appeared, it didn't blink, didn't move with her. Evelyn tilted her head. The reflection stayed still. She stepped to the left. The image followed her, but not like a mirror, like something tracking her from behind the glass. She touched her forehead. The reflection raised its hand, but touched its chest. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from something deeper. A primitive response to the feeling that she no longer controlled her own shadow. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, opened them again. The mirror seemed normal. Every movement matched. But in the bottom left corner, there was a figure. She turned to look. No one was there. She looked back at the mirror. The figure still stood. Upright, unmoving. No face, but its hand was pointing directly at the notebook. The voice recorder on the table clicked on by itself. A recording began to play, but it wasn't her voice, and it wasn't from last night. It was a woman's voice, soft, broken, whispering. Can you hear it yet? That isn't a mirror, it's a door. A soft snap echoed from the direction of the mirror, like an old latch being released. But the mirror didn't swing open, it just quivered slightly. And a breath, a long, slow breath, came from behind the glass. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't run. She just braced herself, one hand on the table, holding on. Because what was trembling wasn't just the mirror, it was her. She was waiting for herself to step out from behind that glass. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines. A final sound, like someone inhaling deeply, and then silence. Evelyn stood frozen. Her legs felt like they no longer belonged to her. The trembling wasn't fear. It was a quiet kind of molting. As if her body was preparing to let another voice inside. She looked down at the desk. The notebook had opened again. This time, no message. It was a map. Drawn in blurred black ink. A rough cross-section of the house. 3 red marks. One in the living room. One in the attic. One directly beneath where she was standing. Before she could react, a deep sound rose inside her chest. It didn't come from the room, or from outside. It came from the mirror. The glass didn't shatter. It didn't open. But every sound in the room was being pulled toward it. She stepped closer, pressed her palm to the frame. It was ice cold. She looked into the mirror. Her reflection stared back, but the eyes were not looking at her. They were looking down. Evelyn followed their gaze. Nothing was there, just old wooden floorboards. But in the mirror, her reflection bent lower and raised a hand. Then, a voice, not hers, but inside her head. Say my name, and I will return. She clenched her jaw, didn't speak, didn't move. The light in the room flickered and died. All outside light vanished. And from within the mirror, a pale hand pressed against the glass, sliding downward, as if wiping fog from the other side. Evelyn didn't scream, but her eyes widened, unblinking. Because across the surface of the mirror, a single name had appeared. Mercy. And the shadow in the reflection had begun to smile. Evelyn didn't remember falling asleep. There was no dream, no nightmare, only a grey void. As if her consciousness had been unplugged, not pushed into dreaming, but held somewhere between sleep and erasure. When she opened her eyes, daylight was already fading. The air in the room was thick, moist, like no one had breathed in here for hours. The mechanical alarm clock she had brought from Boston was frozen. 4:44. Again. The repetition was no longer coincidence. She rose from bed, walked to the window. The town of Bellmare still lay beneath her, quiet, but not peaceful. It wasn't the calm of a sleepy town. It was the hush of glass, separating her from the rest of the world. The town no longer belonged to her, and now, she wasn't sure she belonged to herself either. She put on her coat, slipped the silver spoon into the pocket, took the notebook. She was going back outside, not to run, but to look, with her real eyes. To feel, with her real body. Before the version of her, still trapped inside the mirror, decided to take her place for good. Bellmare didn't welcome her, not with words, but with silence. Not a single person said hello, but their eyes said enough. An old woman pushing a grocery cart paused inside the produce shop. Her gaze fixed on Evelyn, as if she were looking at something that had crawled out of a grave. A young couple walked by with their child. The child tugged on the mother's sleeve. Said something Evelyn couldn't hear, then they both walked faster, no glance backward. Even the dog on the porch, an old grey-coated beagle, didn't bark, didn't growl. It just howled. Long, low, like it was mourning something, only it could see. Evelyn moved faster, down the street, toward the town library. She needed records, maps, anything that might show her Mercy Hill, before it was paved over, and renamed. She gripped the handle of the heavy wooden door. But before she could push it open, a voice filled her ear. Not an echo, not a memory, but a whisper, right behind her right ear. Don't go in there. You don't need paper to know what's coming. Evelyn recoiled, her hand still on the doorknob, but her mind was already somewhere else. A vision, sudden, too vivid to be imagined. A dark hallway, a flickering oil lamp, a thick wooden table, and atop it, a leather-bound book. The final page, stamped with a red iron seal, a circle, surrounding 3 flames. Evelyn gasped. That image wasn't her imagination. It had weight, smell, texture. It wasn't fiction. It was memory, but it didn't belong to her. Evelyn backed away from the library steps, turned, and walked toward the center plaza. The black iron statue was still there, unmoving, uncaring. The woman still tied to the stake, her face still erased, her eyes still open. At the statue's base, melted candle wax clung to the concrete. Remnants from some forgotten ceremony. Evelyn knelt, touched a wax trail with her fingertip. Still soft, still recent. Someone had lit those candles, not long ago. She looked up, and for the first time, she noticed something behind the statue. A stone archway, half covered in moss, hidden beneath the creeping ivy. She stepped around the base, brushed away the vines. There, carved into the stone, faint, but still readable. Latin. The last few words, still intact. Et nomen est non delebita. Evelyn mouthed the phrase. Her Latin was rusty, but she knew enough. And her name shall not be erased. She took a step back, then another. And then, a whisper, from behind her neck. Now you've seen it. Now remember it. A wave of dizziness hit her. She didn't fall, but had to grip a lamppost for balance. Her vision blurred for a second, then sharpened again. But something had changed. From that moment forward, everything Evelyn saw carried 2 meanings. One in the present, and one buried underneath, like a second layer. Not like déjà vu, but like lived memory. Memory that had never belonged to her. Evelyn returned to the house on Mercy Hill as the sky dimmed. She stepped over the familiar porch, and something hit her. A current of cold air swept up from beneath the floorboards. Not a breeze, but a shift. Like something hollow had just inhaled. The door opened easily. No creak, no resistance. But the air inside had changed. The kitchen no longer smelled like ash. It smelled like grease. bitter herbs, and something sweet, like tree sap half burned. She turned on the light. It didn't flicker. But on the kitchen wall, a new mark. A streak of black soot ran upward from the old gas stove, trailing toward the ceiling, as if something had been cooking overnight. Low flame, long burn, then wiped away by hand. She opened the fridge. Inside, a single metal dish, round, bare, except for 3 black seeds, shiny, like peppercorns, but scentless. She didn't touch them, just stared, then backed away. She turned to leave the kitchen, and heard it. Upstairs, a wooden chair, scraping slowly, across the floor. Not a thump, not a fall, a pull. Deliberate, careful. She began to climb the stairs, slow, 1 step at a time. Each step groaned, like coal breaking underfoot. Her bedroom door was still shut, but the door across the hall, the one she had never opened, was now cracked open slightly. Mrs. Grady had warned her. "That door isn't locked," she'd said, "but best you let it sleep." Back then, Evelyn thought it was just a figure of speech. Now, she wasn't sure. She reached for the knob, turned it gently. The door opened, without a sound. Inside, a bare room, empty, except for one thing. A large standing mirror, leaning in the corner, covered with a black cloth. In front of it, a low wooden stool. The same one she just heard moving. The black cloth had been pulled slightly aside. Not fully, just enough for something to look out. No one stood in the mirror, but the room it reflected was different. The ceiling looked higher, the floor cleaner, and in the far corner, a small object glowed faintly, like a candle still burning, even though the real corner was empty. Evelyn turned to check. Nothing. She looked back into the mirror. The candle was still there, still lit. Then, a voice, a whisper, female, soft, just behind the glass. "You've touched the night. Don't go back to being human." Evelyn stepped back. Her heel bumped into the stool. Not painful, but the cold shot up her spine. She looked again, into the mirror, and for a split second, she saw herself. But not standing, not watching. She was sitting, on the stool, back turned to the mirror, as if she had been there, the whole time. Evelyn slammed the door shut behind her, bolted it, as if that would hold back whatever the glass was willing to release. She returned to her bedroom, removed her coat, washed her face with freezing water. The gestures were human, physical, reassuring. But inside her, the cracks had started spreading. She sat back at the desk, opened the notebook. The pages were damp with condensation, even though the window had never been opened. She tried to write her name, Evelyn Graymont Holloway. But the pen stuttered, shook. The E extended, longer than it should. The M came next. She stopped. Not because her hand slipped, but because her will had changed. Part of her wanted to write another name, not hers. Outside, a chime rang once. Evelyn walked out to the balcony. No wind, the chimes were still. But the sound had come from inside her own ears. Then, the whisper again. Sharper now. "You've taken my name. Stop clinging to your old one. It no longer belongs to you." Evelyn collapsed over the desk. Not from exhaustion, but from emptiness. She tried to remember her birthday, but saw the day Mercy was burned instead. She tried to remember her mother's name, but her lips whispered, "Judith, the one who betrayed the vow." A single drop hit the page. She looked up. Her nose was bleeding, but the blood wasn't red. It was black, thick, like cooled wax. Evelyn walked out of the room like a sleepwalker. Each step felt detached, like she was observing her own body from above. She didn't know if she was still Evelyn, or if something else had taken her place. She descended the stairs, barely feeling the ground. In the living room, she reached for the voice recorder, not to record, but to listen. She fast-forwarded. 2:13 a.m. just breathing, shifting. 2:44, nothing, total silence. 3:13 a.m. A whisper, crystal clear. We have already exchanged a part. Evelyn sank to the floor. Her pulse roared in her ears. Vision blurred. Cold sweat coated her back. She could no longer tell what was memory, what was hallucination, what was possession. But one thing was clear. She was disappearing. Night fell completely. By the time Evelyn woke up again, she didn't remember fainting. The pillow was cold. The window still shut. But the room was no longer silent. In the darkness, she heard pages turning. Slow, deliberate. Like someone reading something ancient, something brittle, something sacred. She didn't move. Her eyes followed the ceiling beams, where shadows formed webs, like veins, leading to nowhere. The sound stopped. Then a voice. Not loud, not close, but everywhere. You spoke my name, but you have yet to learn my voice. Evelyn sat up. In her hands was the leather-bound notebook. She didn't remember picking it up, but it was open to the middle, and on the blank pages, a new message. Names are not meant to be spoken, they are meant to be claimed. She gripped the notebook tightly, walked to the mirror. It still hung there, but this time, there was no reflection. Only half of her face, and half that didn't belong. Burned skin, a cloudy eye, a swollen brow. She touched the mirror, and a whisper rose, and not from the glass, but from her own lips. You borrowed my name. Now, I will live inside yours. Evelyn Graymont Holloway had come to Bellmare, seeking history, looking for names, buried under ash. She had found one, burned, forgotten, erased from every plaque and record. But not from memory, not from mirrors, not from breath. The ghost that appeared each night in her room was no stranger. It was Mercy Elborn, a witch burned in 1693, by order of Evelyn's ancestor. The name Holloway had once signed the sentence. Now it was the vessel for the one condemned. So the question is no longer, what did Evelyn see, or even what she dreamed? The question is, will she continue to live under her name, or has it already been replaced by a memory that burned, but never died? Thank you for listening. This is the Whisper Horror Channel. We'll see you again in part 2 of this story, exactly at 3:13 a.m. Sleep well.